Good morning, students. In today's lecture, we will discuss next important question. Bring out elements of horror in the story The Telltale Heart, written by Edgar Allan Poe. Let us discuss the question and its answer. Elements of horror in the story. Edgar Allan Poe is known for his horror stories. The Telltale Heart belongs to that category. It is full of horror. The elements of horror are scattered all over the story. The writer has created the atmosphere of horror very systematically. He does not heap horror upon horror's head. The Telltale Heart has a great psychological interest. The narrator of the story is a mental case. He suffers from mental obsession. So, The Telltale Heart is a story that is full of horrible elements. By portraying the character of the narrator, the writer has made the story full of horror, and the story also has a great psychological interest because the narrator of the story is not well mentally. He suffers from mental obsession. There is a powerful element of horror in the personality of the narrator. He is not an ordinary man. He is a dreadfully nervous man. His sense of hearing is very sharp. He can hear all things in the heaven and on the earth. He can hear many things in hell. So, as we have already discussed, that in this story the narrator is not mentally well person. He suffers from mental obsession, and he is a dreadfully nervous man. He feels nervous on very petty things. His sense of hearing is also very sharp. He can things from very distance. He can hear many things in hell. So his sense of hearing is very powerful. Then there is the eye of the old man. It has something horrible about it. It is the eye of a vulture. It is a pale blue eye which haunts the narrator day and night. His blood runs cold whenever it falls upon him. He is terribly frightened and chilled with fear. Ultimately, it leads him to the murder of the old man. In the story, The Telltale Heart, the eye of the old man, which is of pale blue color, and it looks like an eye of a vulture. So the eye of that old man haunts the narrator for day and night. Whenever he sees the old man's eye, he feels terribly frightened, he feels afraid, and he is chilled with fear. Ultimately, he decides to murder that old man due to his eye, which looks like the eye of a vulture. Every night about midnight, the narrator opens the old man's door very gently. He makes an opening sufficient for his head and thrusts in his head. He moves it very slowly lest he should disturb the old man's sleep. It takes him an hour to place his whole head within the opening so that he can see him lying on the bed. A single thin ray of his dark lantern falls upon the vulture eye. He does it for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. It certainly creates an atmosphere of horror. Every night, the narrator, by getting irritated, after getting irritated by the eye of that old man, he every night goes into the room of that old man. He moves it very slowly lest he moves the door of old man's room very slowly lest he should disturb the old man's sleep. So every night he tries to check the old man falling asleep, and he also check him that if he is lying on his bed silently. When on the eighth night, when for 7 nights he goes into his room and check that he is falling asleep, a single thin ray of his dark lantern falls upon the vulture-like eye of that old man. Then, so for 7 long nights, he does the same process. He goes into his room and checks him that he is falling asleep silently. So this element creates an atmosphere of horror. Upon the eighth night, the narrator opens the door with more than usual caution. He is happy at the thought that the old man knows nothing about his secret thoughts and deeds. Perhaps the old man feels the narrator's presence in his room. He suddenly moves and jumps up in his bed and cries out, "Who is there?" This touch of horror sends a shudder through our spine. When upon the eighth night, the narrator, in order to murder that old man, he opens the door with usual caution. He is happy at the thought that the old man was unaware of the thoughts which were running into the mind of that narrator. Perhaps the old man feels the narrator's presence in his room, and when on the eighth night he goes into the room of that old man, the old man feels his presence in his room. He suddenly moves and jumps up in his bed and cries out, "Who is there?" And he's asking about the presence of someone in his room. Also creates an element of horror. And this touch of horror sends a shudder through our spine. There is something horrible about the sharp ears of the narrator. They can hear the low, dull sound of the beating of the old man's heart. The sound goes on increasing. It grows quicker and louder every moment. It excites the narrator to uncontrollable terror. He fears that the sound of beating may be heard by a neighbor. He commits the cold-blooded murder of the old man to silence the beating of his heart. It curdles our blood. As we have already discussed, that the narrator has a very strong sense of hearing. He has a very powerful sense of hearing. He can hear very low, dull voice, like a very dull sound, like the beating of old man's heart. When the sound of heartbeat of that old man grows quicker and louder, that sound excites the narrator to uncontrollable terror. Terror means fear. He fears that the sound of beating may be heard by a neighbor. He feels that the beating sound of heart can even be heard by a neighbor. He commits the cold-blooded murder of the old man to silence the beating of his heart. So, in order to stop the sound of heartbeat of that old man, he murders him in a cold blood. It curdles our blood. And when we even imagine that a person killing an old man only due to his pale blue eye and his sound of his heartbeat, we also feel that the narrator, is not mentally well person. The old man shrieks only once. In an instant, the narrator drags him to the floor and pulls the heavy bed over him. The job is done. So, in order to get rid of that person, the he when he goes into his room on the eighth night to get rid of him, the old man shrieks only once. He cries for only one time, and in an instant, the narrator drags him to the floor. In order to kill the old man, to murder the old man, the narrator drags him to the floor. He pulls him to the floor and pulls the heavy bed upon which he was lying. He pulls that bed over him. So the job is done, means he murders the old man. The bed is removed and the old man is stone dead. The narrator dismembers the corpse. He cuts off the head, the arms, and the legs. He takes up 3 planks from the flooring of the room and deposits everything there. So, after killing him, after murdering that old man, the narrator dismembers the corpse. Dismembers means he cuts into pieces to the corpse, means dead body. He cuts into pieces to the dead body of that old man. He cuts off his head, his arms, and his legs. He takes up 3 planks from the flooring of the room and deposits everything there. He takes up 3 planks. Planks means wooden pieces. He takes up 3 wooden pieces from the flooring of the room. He takes up 3 pieces from the flooring of the room and deposits everything there. He then replaces the planks very cleverly and cunningly after removing those planks from the flooring and burying those cut pieces of the dead body of that old man. He replaces the planks very cleverly and very cunningly. Cunningly means in a very clever manner, smart manner. There is no stain or blood spot anywhere because he has done everything in a tub. The murder of the old man and dismembering his corpse are so horrible that our hair stands on its end. So he does everything so cleverly and clearly that there is no stain or blood spot anywhere. And the murder, the act of murdering that old man and dismembering or cutting into pieces to his dead body, all these elements are so horrible that our hair stands on its end when we read this part of the story. The telltale heart of the old man produces a ringing sound even when the old man's dismembered corpse lies concealed under the flooring. In the story, we read that after murdering that old man, the narrator can even hear the beating sound of his heart, which produces a ringing sound. The narrator hears the ringing in his ears. It grows louder, louder, louder. The narrator wonders whether the police officers hear it. He feels that they know everything and they are making a mockery of his horror. And when the police officers come to his house, visit his house to inquire about the sound which was heard by the narrator's neighbor, the shrieking sound at night. So when the police officers come to his house to inquire about that shrieking voice, he feels that they know everything and they are making a mockery of his horror. The sound grows louder and becomes unbearable. He confesses his crime. They can take out the body of the old man from under the planks of the flooring. And when he thinks that even the police officers can hear the heart beating sound of the old man, he confesses everything. He confesses his crime. He informs to the police officers that they can take out the body of that old man from under the floor, from under the planks, from under the pieces of the floor. The sound of the beating of the telltale heart of the old man creates the greatest horror. So, in the end of the story, when the narrator can even hear the beating sound of the heart of that old man who is now murdered by the narrator himself, he can even he can hear the sound of his heartbeat even after killing him. This element also creates a greatest horror in our hearts. So students, these all are the elements which contain horror in them. Tomorrow we will discuss the next question. Thank you very much.